Hello everyone, this is Tim, and this is going to be a summary for my Lamentations of the Flame Princess campaign, session number 12. Now we started off the campaign with a new character, Mallow the Cleric, who worships a god or gods of pain and suffering, and he met up with Ash the Elf. Keith Hershey Jr. just joined the campaign. This was the first time he was in it, and he seemed to have a pretty good time, or just be disturbed by it. I'm not sure which, but that was good to have him. Those two met up, and they smelled this sweet fragrance coming from the hills and mountains, and they looked to investigate that. That was probably the first thing that happened in the town that was good in a long while. They met up with Ramelzi and Rayhan as they were coming out of the mountains, and this is the first time that Mallow saw Rayhan with that troll flesh on his face, that dark red skin, so he kind of commented on that. It started raining, and it kept raining the rest of the day. They decided to go to see Mayor Rupert Irving and talk to him about the possible annihilation of the town of Pembrooktonshire by those small white fruit creatures that grew out of the trees, the red-leaf trees in the hills and the mountains. They saw that Constable Stark had returned to the town. He was gone on vacation for a long while, and he didn't much care for the way that the Assistant Constable Peter had taken care of things, by deputizing strangers and allowing them to run amok in town with their weapons and doing what have you. And he'd heard bad rumors about how much trouble they had caused, and he basically couldn't believe that Peter had done this, and he didn't really like Peter's decisions. And he confronted the party about Jonathan Pembroke being killed, the heir of the town founder, and it was all their fault that this knight was free and that he was the one that killed them. The Assistant Constable Peter tried to defend the party and all that they had done for the town, but Constable Stark didn't want to hear it. He preferred strict rules and strict punishments, and he just did not like what he heard about all of their actions and what they had done throughout the town. He was visibly shaken by what he called lies that the party was talking to him about, all the things that they had done, talking about spirits and the lack thereof, trolls, and all these horrible things that had happened since they came to the town. Being frustrated, Constable Stark ran out, pushed past them, but not before the priest Mallow suggested that he needed a little bit of pain and suffering in his life to improve his mood. Peter wrote Mallow a writ declaring himself to be a deputy of the town. They headed to see Mayor Rupert and instead found the steward. His name was Pip Moldings, and he was very disrespectful to the party because the party had put him to sleep last time with poisoned wine, so he wasn't very happy with them. But the mayor heard them approach, opened up his door, and they went in to talk to him. They were just starting to talk about what was going to happen with these small humanoid white creatures, coming down, needing to get past that tree line, so they were throwing blood in the air to spread the trees, and they were just about ready to tell them all this stuff when buildings started to collapse just outside in the town center. And when they all went downstairs, the mayor stood up from his desk, and lo and behold, he wasn't wearing pants for some reason. And he basically said that the reason he does that is to be comfortable. So that was kind of a strange moment there. They looked out at the remains of one of the buildings that had collapsed. It was manly ropes and a pigeon place, a pigeon courier. They noted that there was something weird in that every single nail was removed from the wood, and every piece of wood was separate from all other pieces of wood. It was as if the building had been turned into a giant pile of building supplies. And they really weren't sure how that happened. It seemed very strange. And another building collapsed. This was the shoemaker's place. There seemed to be lots of movements on top of the pile of lumber and nails. It seemed like there were lots of little things, little invisible things perhaps, running around. Mallow the priest picked up a clod of dirt and chucked him at it. And when that happened, the movement stopped. Helio, he was the shoemaker, climbed out of the ruins. He's a pretty old man, and he introduced himself. He said that the only strange thing he had noticed about the town was that from time to time he forgot huge periods of time. But the party really didn't ask questions about that. They just kept going because nails started to fly through the air and hit this priest Mallow. A bunch of other nails started to hover in the air as if there were perhaps tons of little hands holding onto them. Ramalzi swung at the pile with a chunk of wood, and then he was hit by about 4 nails in the face and chest. When he punched out in frustration, he hit one of them. He felt some resistance, and its little invisible body went flying through the air. Rayhan created a weighted lasso to try to, perhaps use it to attack these things. And while that was happening, Ash the elf was casting a sleep spell. And the way I have it set up in this game is there's a wild magic table. So there's a 5% chance it goes really well, or a 5% chance it goes really horribly wrong for you. And he rolled a natural 20. So he rolled on this chart, and it gave us the result of everyone gets plus 1d4 levels of experience. So that was pretty, whoa, they didn't expect that from a little sleep spell. So I had Aaron basically narrate the scene, and he said that the spell went off, and they all fell down to the ground, and this purple vortex of swirling energy and life force came out and just flew into the head of all the other people except for Ash. So Mallow, Rayhan, and Ramelzi got this burst of memories and insight and all these strange recollections from these creatures. They saw various planes of existence and strange colors and surreal nature things all around them. They saw memories of little hammers working on shoes, and one of the visions they got was little hammers turned around so the claw end were tearing the flesh of this older woman. And they kind of got the impression that it might have been the wife of Helio, but they weren't really sure. So all these buildings were collapsing, and they went to this other building, and there was just more piles of wood. And this is when Rayhan started getting visions, the troll visions again, of fighting off these creatures, splatting them with a giant stick, and then he came back to himself. And in this pile of wood that we were at, this woman crawls out, and then these poison snakes started crawling out of the pile as well, chewing into her legs, sinking venom, and just making her talk all this crazy talk. And she kept saying things like, "The wicked children, the wicked children! I can't believe they're alive!" Things like all kinds of strange stuff like that. And her business was enormous dolls. So the party figured out that all these snakes were inside these porcelain dolls, other sorts of dolls. Some of them were kind of seductive. It's kind of a disturbing place altogether. So throughout the session, everyone kept saying things like, this town's horrible. I mean, they put snakes in dolls for goodness gracious, But the woman crawled out, and she eventually died from the poison that the snakes had sunk into her leg and poisoned her with. Militia members were starting to form up because all these buildings were collapsing, but they seemed more worried about formation and whose spot was where, and oh, that's not your spot, I stand over there, you bang the drum. So it was all procession oriented, and they weren't really worried about helping out people. And this is when Rayhan went over there and started slapping them around, telling them what to do, and eventually they listened. While this chaos is going on, the 20-foot tall bier, this thing where bodies are laid for the funerals, was in the center of the town. And Jonathan Pembroke, the descendant of the founder of the town, stood up. His corpse was half eaten by crows. His guts and blood were falling out of the bottom of his torso. And he just started pointing and twisting around. His head was spinning around his body. And needless to say, the group reacted quickly. Ramelzi let loose one of his rare charges of his lightning bolt wand, blowing huge chunks of blood and rotten flesh off of the bones. His basically skull fell down into the cavity and was just resting there. All the eyes and brain matter flew out the back, and he basically fell off at the top of the bier. Rayhan managed to get a shot off before that happened, and Mallow used this pouch of burnt human flesh and cast a turn undead spell, and it worked very effectively. Jonathan Pembroke got up from the ground and ran over to this one building. He's trying to get inside. Ash managed to shoot and basically wedge the door so that it couldn't open. So he was like hovering in fear from Mallow, this cleric, and He has a cat of nine tails with broken glass and nails on the end of leather cords, 9 of them, that he drags behind him to just be more intimidating. And Jonathan Pembroke was, this undead form of him was very scared and hiding. During this time, Ramalzi decided he's going to put an end to this. A second charge went off, surging through the air, and basically just destroyed Jonathan Pembroke's body. He collapsed to the ground. Blood and ichor and gore flew everywhere. Mallow the priest was covered from head to toe with brain matter and chunks of flesh and hair. And this is when Ramalzi's evil black book with the chains on it flew out of his bag of its own volition, landed in front of them. And Ramalzi decided, he has to find a soul for this book once a week, otherwise his life and his soul is forfeit. So he opened up the chains, and Jonathan Pembroke's soul, they felt a strong wind coming from his body, entered the book. The chains relocked. It whispered, that it was hungry, and then it closed itself and just rattled around, smashing off the ground a few times. Opens back up, and there's blood, spells written all over, like a lot of the blank pages that were in there. So it seemed like Ramalzi has some additional spells at his in his repertoire from now on. And he went over into an alley to see what those were. Ash decided that he wasn't getting paid enough, so he went into this armor shop since all the townsfolk had fled to the outskirts of the town. And he got himself some new arrows and some new armor, although it was marked with a certain emblem from the crafter. The group had talked a little bit about, they should really get paid from the constable or from the mayor, and they need to do something about that, and perhaps they need to leave. They went over to this jewelry place that had collapsed and picked up some necklaces, tiaras, and gems. And Ash the Elf was interested in finding some gems to use to cast his spells with, because it's sort of like a rosary bead for him. He has like a bunch of different gems that he uses to cast different spells. So there are emeralds, rubies, and some diamonds here and there. Inside the rubble of this place called Roger's Gadgets, an arm broke out, but it looked like it was armored at first. They dug him out and they realized that his arms were actually half flesh, half like iron and gadgets and gears and pulleys. So the group hid all their loot that they just got out of the rubble, and they talked to him for a little bit. And he covered himself with a shirt. He told them that there have always been terrible things done in the town, not just since the group arrived there. He told them that he didn't believe that most people in the town were even human. He said that he thought that even the people themselves don't know these strange things. Everyone just sort of follows their own daily tasks and patterns. The group wondered if perhaps the Pembroke family had made some evil pact with some strange demons or ancient gods way back when. And this person Roger, this half iron, half person, basically said that he had done all the work himself. And Ramalzi kept throwing the idea out there that you have to have some magic about you. You can't just be like that. There has to be something there. And Roger said that if there's any spells, they must be innate, because he doesn't cast any. He told them that a sort of awakening came over him when he started to remove chunks of his flesh from his body, the stuff that had started to decay or just wasn't working anymore. And he sort of felt like he woke up from a strange dream. He feels more like an observer now of the town, like an outsider that isn't affected like the rest of them. And this is how he's been for quite some time. And he's quite old. He said that he lived 90 years in Pembrooktonshire and 50 years in another town. He hoped the group would stay in the town to help do some good, and he told them of Patricia Finn, who was the midwife of the town. And he said that it seems like she has a lot of evil and strangeness revolving around her, even though she seems quite normal and safe, and you wouldn't expect anything bad to come from her. At the midwifery place, the door was open. They found a large waiting room inside, and a back area where there were several tubs for water birthing, as long as pails and some plumbing to fill up the tubs with. And that reminded them of the strange plumber that talked about turtles and stolen princesses beneath the town in the sewers. They reminded themselves they wanted to talk to him in the future. And there was this locked closet door in the corner that they seemed a little intimidated by. Rayhan picked the lock, and as soon as that happened, the temperature of the room dropped 20 degrees. A strange, horrible voice was muttering incomprehensible words, and it was heard coming from the same room. Ramowsy drew his angelic sword, but the metal was running down his arm when he held it up. The sword handle was dissolving even as he looked at it, even when he put it back into his bag. Rayhan then burst into the room with a rapier in hand, and then when the door was opened, the temperature dropped another 40 degrees in the room. The light in the room was darkening and then got very dim. Inside the door, they saw a small flight of stairs leading down that was covered in scalps, flesh, faces. Baby fingers were strung together on strings. Clumps of hair and flesh were weaved into ropes and strings. Quilts of flesh were hanging from the ceiling. They got the feeling that the skin was from infants, children, and this voice of muttering continued to echo up from the darkness below. Sewage was several inches deep in the tunnel. There were no obvious sources of this strange noise, though an infant's face was evident on the wall along with other ones. They lit a large candle, but it was pretty dim, and they realized that they should go get some torches. And they made some makeshift ones. Ramowsy threw his candle down the hallway, and they just saw more faces and more skin. Mallow touched the flesh on the walls, and it was warm, disturbingly so. It was also very soft, like touching a baby's arm. He then took a few steps back and whipped the flesh with his and the faces on the wall with his cat of nine tails. A chunk of this flesh was torn and ruined and fell on the ground. And behind on the wall, there was a wall there, and then there was little streams of blood, but not veins. It was just blood running in patterns on the wall. And it was flowing in one direction. They heard a sigh from somewhere when they did this, and they really weren't sure where that came from. They then moved forward, and they came to a circular room with 4 exits. They were coming down one of them. And in the center was a 6 foot wide and 4 foot deep and 4 foot tall altar of dark black stone with a divot in the center and 4 channels to, maybe let blood run away. And that was pretty disturbing. So they got the feeling that this woman was sacrificing infants, but they really didn't look too much into the altar itself or maybe what happened. They were curious about where these other tunnels led to. They heard some sewage running down from the above city, splashing into the water but beside them to the right tunnel. And that's where we left off. They weren't really sure where to go, what to do. They thought about maybe going straight. Who was this woman? What was she doing? And why was she doing this to infants? And how had she gotten away with this for so long? These are probably some questions that are reverberating in their mind at this time. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll talk to you guys later.